I realized I had to give this talk a catchy name because I'm competing with Martin. And Martin's amazing, and I wish I could see his talk. So thank you for coming. In 1956, a judge in Alabama passed a law that made it illegal for the University of Alabama to deny admission to students based on race. So this was a monumental win for the civil rights movement. And a girl by the name of Authrine Lucy applied and was accepted into that university. She was the first black student to ever attend. On the first day that she attended, people who were understandably upset and against this law showed up, and they didn't give her a very warm welcome. They booed her, they threw eggs at her, some people even threw bricks. The car that she arrived in was damaged, people were jumping on the car, and Authrine got to attend 3 days of classes, and every day that she attended, the violence got worse and worse. And the president and the trustees of the university decided that they had to do something because of all the violence that was happening on campus. And so they did what I think we might have expected, and they punished all of the white people who were, no they didn't. They expelled Authrine Lucy from the university. They kicked her out after 3 days. And the newspaper headlines that came out the day after that said, "Things are quiet in Tuscaloosa. There is peace on the campus of the University of Alabama." And it was that article that inspired Martin Luther King to write a sermon called "When Peace Becomes Obnoxious." And in that sermon, one of I think the strongest lines that comes from that is this: that peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. And the idea of peace and negative peace very often get confused. And is anyone here familiar with the term negative peace? Just by a show of hands. So quite a few, half the room. So if you look at that half of the sentence here, just the word peace, it simply refers to the absence of violence. But peace at the cost of justice is what is referred to as negative peace. And as activists who are trying to create a positive peace in the world, creating that positive peace is not easy. As we've seen in past social justice movements, it can be actually quite messy. Martin Luther King was arrested many, many times for disrupting the peace. And people that don't know about this concept don't understand that what was actually being disrupted was this idea of negative peace. And just as the concepts of peace and negative peace are often confused within society, so are these two words: non-violence and non-violence. And I'm just curious, another show of hands, how many people here know the difference between these two words? Okay, so a few less. So, the obvious difference is there's a dash in the top word. And what that really means is not violent. Non-violence actually refers to the active prevention of violence. So it can include things like peaceful resistance, civil disobedience. And I would like to share with you This is part of a much bigger training that I was a part of. I'd like to share with you a short portion of that training called Kingian Nonviolence. So it's the philosophy and strategy of Martin Luther King that he used in the Civil Rights Movement. And I'm going to share with you the 6 principles of Kingian Nonviolence. And the first one is that nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Anyone know who these 4 people are? Recognize that photo? This is a small group of people who later became referred to as the Greensboro Four, and they were activists in the Civil Rights Movement who planned one of the most well-known actions from that Civil Rights Movement. And they were, the year was 1960, they were in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they were trying to figure out ways to get a lot of media attention to highlight the issues of segregation. And so what they decided to do was pretty cool. They went to a store called Woolworth. They went inside, they purchased a few items at desegregated, it was a store where you could buy stuff. But inside the store was a restaurant that was a whites-only restaurant. So after they bought their products, they went to the restaurant, they sat down and they asked for a cup of coffee. And they were denied service and they were asked to leave. But they didn't leave. They sat there the entire day waiting to be served, and they weren't. The following day, about 30 other people joined them. The day after that, there were a couple hundred, and this movement spread very, very quickly. The lunch counter sit-in movement spread very quickly to surrounding states. And people started filling up whites-only lunch counters and sitting down for an entire day. Peacefully, quietly, they would actually bring, a lot of the activists were students, so they would bring books, they would do their work there, but they refused to leave until they got served. At first, it was a bit of a joke. I think a lot of the people thought it was funny. But as time went on, people started getting not so happy about it. And it escalated to the point where the activists started experiencing quite a bit of violence. And what you see here is a picture of some people who were annoyed at their actions, throwing food on them. What you don't see here are some of the people who were also burned with cigarettes. There was a case, at least one that I know of, that a girl had her hair lit on fire. And the entire time that this was happening to them, they sat there and they didn't react. And this was expected. What's interesting to me about this is that they trained for months. There was actually some pretty rigorous trainings that they went through, which are called something like hassle lines, which we train with now as well for nonviolent, disruptive, direct action. And it involves, they actually trained where they went through these scenarios where people were, pretend insulting them, but they would try to take it to the maximum where they were actually being burned by cigarettes so they could feel what that pain would feel like. So when they were actually in the action, they wouldn't react. And the reason why, I think it might be apparent, but the reason why they had to be sure that they didn't react to the violence that was coming towards them was, imagine if one person had stood up and defended themselves and punched one of the white people. I mean, I think most people would agree that they would have been justified in defending themselves, but you can imagine what the headlines would have read about how violent the activists and the protesters were. So when this violence, hit them, of course, the police showed up and they did what they should do. They arrested the white people. No, they didn't. They arrested the protesters for peacefully sitting there, simply demanding to be treated as an equal. Sorry, before I go on to that, I want to point out that although the first principle is that it's a way of life for courageous people, not all the people in the movement need to be as courageous as this. We don't all have to put ourselves in harm's way. But what is important, I think, is that the people who do decide to risk their safety, their lives, their freedom in our movement are people that are going to jail for doing investigations, rescues, all different types of things. That if we're not able to do that, that at the very least, we are supporting them. Because these people were heavily criticized within the movement, both by whites as being very annoying, and within their own movement as harming the movement and making all black people look bad. The second principle is that the beloved community is the framework for the future. The beloved community was Dr. King's idea of what society would look like once we reached a true positive peace. And that included a community with everyone, including people that at the time they considered their enemies. The goal in nonviolence is not to defeat your enemy, but to win them over. And the reason for that is even if you defeat your enemy, they're still your enemy. Whereas if you learn to win them over and include them in this beloved community, it creates that true, long-lasting, positive peace. And I think it's interesting to explore how people in the civil rights movement were being marginalized, oppressed, and murdered and being killed. There were police shootings that went completely unanswered. So they were dying, literally dying in the streets during these protests. How these people could still view white people, police officers, as part of their community and not as enemies. I think it's interesting to talk about different types of love. So the Greeks identified more than these, but these are three kind of main types of love. So eros is the erotic, kind of primal love that stems from our instinctive kind of need to procreate. Philia is more of a brotherly love that you would experience, let's say, between friends. Plato believed that it wasn't necessary to have physical attraction between two people to have love, and so the term platonic love is probably what we're familiar with, which is love without physical attraction. And then agape love, which according to the Greeks was the kind of highest, most radical form of love. It is a selfless love. It's not the type of love that is kind of portrayed today in Hollywood movies, this kind of outpouring of romantic actions, or the way that we've been conditioned to think about love in our sex-obsessed culture. It's truly like an infinite empathy, unconditional love and consideration for others. And I think agape love is what allows us to see ourselves in others. Tobias is here at the back of the room, and this really rang a bell in your keynote talk yesterday when you said, it was a quote that you said, and I'm glad you're here because you can maybe tell me who said it. I forgot who said it, but it was something like, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Who said that? Sorry, it's in your presentation. Yeah. And essentially all that means is that, like maybe some people in the room, I'm also not religious, so I would substitute the idea of the grace of God for luck. I mean, if I had been born in a different time or in a different family, in a different situation, I may very well be a slaughterhouse worker, a truck driver, slaughterhouse owner. I might be one of these people. And I think it's really important, this idea of agape love, and it's something that when I was introduced to this, very much changed my perception. I used to be an angry vegan. I went through that phase, I think a lot of people do. And this idea, just recognizing that, we are no better, and that could be us, and it was us at some points, makes it, I think, a little bit easier to have love for everyone. And I also want to emphasize, thinking back to the civil rights movement, I hope this isn't inappropriate to say, but if they could have love for the people who were directly oppressing and killing them, I think we really need to work together as a movement to really get rid of that, that justifiable anger that we have inside, but direct it appropriately and not have hate for people who aren't vegan, who find it very difficult to go vegan, or who are directly involved in the oppression and deaths of all of these animals. The third one is attack forces of evil, not persons doing evil. I have a quick story about this one. I, for the past few years, have organized with a group called Direct Action Everywhere as a local organizer in Toronto. And I just want to show you one example of how nonviolent direct action led to a big success in our eyes, a big win. There had been this community center called Scatting Court. And for years, they had this event called Gone Fishing, where they would take the swimming pool inside of the community center, and they would fill it full of fish. And then they would have community members show up, probably paid a small fee, and then they could fish in the swimming pool. And fish is basically just, of course, these fish have no chance at all. And protests they had been protesting outside of the community center for several years with no results. Nothing happened, nothing changed. Definitely people were annoyed with the protesters, but nothing really happened. So last year, one of the organizers in Toronto decided to escalate, amplify the protest. And I'm going to show you a video of what happened. This video was just released now, about a year later, because one of the people that was involved actually faced criminal charges, which were completely false. And once it actually went to trial, it was immediately dismissed because of the video evidence. So we couldn't release the video footage, but it just came out. I will also apologize. This video was done in my early days as a video editor. When I just started doing videos, it's not as good as my more recent stuff. But it'll give you an idea, and then I'll discuss it a little bit after it's done. So.
And I think that is not very nice. Don't kill fish. Do you understand that? To do that? That is called violence.
guys came up to me and said, I'm going to fish you out. Ran back, grabbed the fishing rod, cast the line, and started whipping it past me. Actually managed to hook my pinky finger, a little slice in it, so I very quickly exited the other side of the pool before he did more damage.
There's no excuse for animal abuse. There's no excuse for animal abuse. There's no excuse for animal abuse.
Be passionate for the planet. Be passionate for the planet. Be passionate for the planet. Be passionate for space.
You set a bad example for your children, okay?
By being compassionate and not
No, you're setting a bad example for your...
by teaching them not to kill, and life is not ours to take.
Listen, you're not going to stop this whole world, okay? You're not going to stop
I'm
it.
gonna try.
It's part of... No, you
I'm
won't.
gonna try.
You
I've
won't.
got a kid who I want to live in a better world, and I'm gonna keep it up.
You know what's going to happen? After you're all gone, I'm all gone, everybody, you're not going to change the world. It's going to be the same, the bottom line.
So we should give up?
Yes, you need to give up.
So, I'd like to point out a few things. One, I see a lot of things we could have done better in that video. Two, more importantly than that, I want to tell what resulted from that, because it's really important to understand that these types of actions, the goal of the action is not the action itself. It's part of a process of steps, and the reason why I think in all movements they choose to engage in direct action like this is simply to gain leverage to be able to negotiate with them. So what happened in this case was immediately after that event, one of the organizers who'd been trying to, who had a good relationship with the management of the community center, her name's Mary Chris, she scheduled a meeting to discuss what had happened. And long story short, what they managed to negotiate was that, well, first of all, what she learned was that the community center organized these events because they wanted to give inner city kids who didn't have a lot of money and a lot of opportunity the same opportunities that the rich kids had, which is going up to the cottages with their parents and going fishing. So of course the inner city kids don't have that, so they said, okay, well, let's give them the opportunity to fish, which the motivation for it was beautiful. They were trying to help their community. So when they understood that, what they managed to do was convince the community center, I mean, we obviously told them we're going to keep doing this, and they were not happy with that. But we said, listen, let's change your program. We'll achieve the same goal that you have. We'll give kids an experience that they wouldn't otherwise have. And what they agreed to was to allow us to work with them. So they canceled this program, and they now will offer a program where kids will be able to go and visit an animal sanctuary where they will get to meet rescued farm animals. So just a small example, again, not a perfect example, but an idea of what, how we can leverage that. And this is a very small example, one community center, but of course the civil rights movement used examples like this to achieve mass change within the US. The fourth principle is accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve the goal. And I just go back to this picture. I mentioned it, imagine what would have happened if they had fought back. The suffering that we receive acts as a mirror for society to kind of really highlight who is violent and who is not violent. And this was very, very powerful when this hit the newspaper, the media, when news of this reached the president, when Martin Luther King had meetings with him. It was very, very clear that the protesters were not the aggressors and were never perceived as being the aggressors. Avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. Martin Luther King said a quote which I really like, "I choose love, hate is too great a burden to bear. And he also said this: we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. And the final principle of Kingian nonviolence is that the universe is on the side of justice. This is just a belief that justice will always prevail. And if you look back through all of the social justice movements and all the progress that we've seen throughout history, it seems to be that way. And for me, I think most of us would agree that the question is not if we will stop exploiting and oppressing and killing non-human animals. It's just a question of when. And so I'd also like to share with you something that I decided to do about a year and a half ago to try to speed up that process. And it's called the Liberation Pledge. Has anyone here heard of the Liberation Pledge? And I know that a few people have taken it because I've seen forks on your wrists. So the symbol of the Liberation Pledge is a fork. If you see any animal rights activists with a fork on their wrist, it's a Liberation Pledge. And first I'll tell you about a story, what inspired the Liberation Pledge, and then I'll tell you what the Liberation Pledge is. So the Liberation Pledge was inspired by a campaign that happened in China to try to end foot binding. So foot binding existed for well over 1,000 years in China. It was a status symbol. It was viewed as a mark of beauty. About 40 to 50% of Chinese women had their feet bound since, I think, a very, very young age. And almost 100% of the upper class had them bound because of the status symbol it represented. The problem was that it was very debilitating. It provided limited mobility and lifelong disabilities. And that is an image of what the foot looks like after being bound for a lifetime, for many years. And that's what a normal foot should look like. So how did foot binding end? There were many attempts throughout history. There were many people that were opposed to this. It was a really cruel practice. There was even an emperor who was very strongly opposed to it and tried to put an end to it. The problem was that it was so culturally ingrained in that society that he just was not able to, despite being the emperor of the country. It was only in the early 20th century that progress was made, and progress was made very, very quickly. So there was a grassroots movement that decided to take on the anti-foot binding campaign and decided to take on a pledge. And the pledge was very simple. It was a public pledge from families with daughters to never bind their daughters' feet. And families that had sons also publicly pledged, so to all their friends, their neighbors, their communities, they publicly pledged that they would refuse to let their sons marry women with bound feet. 95% of girls born after 1910 had unbound feet. Today it's completely eliminated. This was the idea that motivated the Liberation Pledge. So the Liberation Pledge is three things. One, it is a public refusal to eat animals' bodies and animal products. The second one is a public refusal to sit at the same table where animal products are being served. And the third one is to encourage others to do the same. My perception of the Liberation Pledge is this. For me, it is a very clear, daily, consistent stand against injustice. It is a strong opposition to a very brutal and violent system that experiences a lot of negative peace. It is a way for me to show respect for the victims of violence. It is also a way to display solidarity with other people who have that same strong opposition to violence. And I want to take a minute just to talk about how it's ethically consistent. And I do want to recognize that, on one hand, you have what's doing right. On the other hand, you have what's doing effective, I think. And so I was very conscious of that when I started considering this. And at first, I was very worried that if I did what was right, I wouldn't be effective as an activist. And so I want to just talk about what's right here. So the ethically consistent part for me was very simple. As a Save Movement organizer for the past 4 years, 3.5 years, I spend a lot of time outside of slaughterhouses. I spend a lot of time seeing the victims of violence and connecting with them. And we all know this. We use this as examples. Usually when we're talking to people, we very quickly highlight that there's no difference, right, between the way that a dog, a pig, or a cow suffers and how their freedom should be respected. Yet, when I was eating with people who were eating those animals, I was okay sitting at the table with them. Yet I have a dog that I rescued, and if somebody took my dog, Kona, and barbecued Kona, and said, come over for a barbecue, and I know it's probably difficult for you to eat Kona, so we'll just, cook some veggie burgers for you. We'll even clean the grill before we cook them. I don't know too many people that, if you were in my position, would go to that barbecue. So that was my ethical challenge. Was I didn't see why I was okay with violence towards certain animals, but not towards the ones that were closer to me. Now I had to think about the impact on my effectiveness as an activist if I did that. So I cheated a little bit, and I didn't take the pledge right away. I tested it for about 5 months while I was backpacking through South America. And you know what? Let me hold that story for a second. I just want to also talk about the fact that the pledge for me has now become a way to be disruptive, to disrupt that negative peace that exists at all of those tables where animals' bodies are being served. And so I do want to tell you about how I tell people about the pledge, because I think this is the most important part of the pledge. The key to the pledge is you don't exclude yourself. It's not meant to be exclusionary. It's actually meant to be inclusive. So the pledge is not fulfilled if your friends are going out for dinner and they're going to go to a restaurant that serves animal products. The pledge is not fulfilled officially if you just don't go. If you just avoid going, that's not the pledge. The really important part is it's a public refusal. So what that means is that when I talk to people about the pledge, I tell them a personal story. How am I for time, by the way? Oh, did you show me that sign before? I didn't see it, sorry. So I'm still with 10 minutes ago, sorry. So how I tell people about the pledge, I talk about a personal story. And so everybody here has their own experience with violence, with seeing the violence that's happening to animals. I have a very close firsthand experience because I've done investigations, I've been inside of slaughterhouses, I've recorded animals being brutalized and killed. So I tell people, I say, listen, for example, when I was backpacking through South America, so I was in a hostel, everybody wants to go for food. My first suggestion, because I've already looked this up on Happy Cow, is, hey guys, I'm gonna go to this restaurant over here. If you guys wanna join me, great. If they join me at the vegan restaurant, great. If they said, oh, we wanna go to this other place that has, burgers, meat burgers, I would say, you guys don't know this about me. I do a bit of a weird job, but I work in animal rights and I do investigations, and I actually have been inside of farms and slaughterhouses where animals are just being completely abused and killed, and it really affects me, and I can't possibly enjoy my meals when their bodies are there, because all I think about is all the horrible stuff that I've seen. So if you guys want, I'm going to go to this restaurant. They also have really good burgers according to the reviews, and you can come with me. Or if you guys want to eat at that restaurant, that's totally cool. I'll just eat by myself, and then later we can meet up and go for a drink or something. And when I said that, through 5 months of backpacking, not once did people ever let me eat by myself. They always joined me at that vegan restaurant. We talked about veganism a lot during those meals, and the beauty of it was that they were enjoying these awesome vegan burgers, while talking about veganism. And people obviously become a lot less defensive when they're not in the process of consuming the animal products, which you're trying to get them to realize is not a good thing, right? So I'm not saying that, I'm definitely not implying that that has always worked. I had to miss a really good friend of mine. A really good friend of mine had a birthday dinner. He knew that I didn't eat at restaurants, and he chose to eat at a restaurant that had animal products. Yeah, I didn't judge him. I said, no problem. I'll join you guys after for drinks. And I know that they missed me. I know that they missed me being there. A few months later, I got a phone call from another friend in that group of friends. He said, hey, Alex, we want to hang out with you. We haven't seen you in a while. We want to have you over for dinner. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh. She was like, we know it has to be vegan, so we would like to cook for you. We would like to make a fully vegan meal for about 5 or 6 friends. And I said, oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I said, what can I bring? She said, don't worry about it. We want to cook for you. I was like, okay. I went over, and they had prepared this like massive feast of all vegan dishes. They had prepared vegan desserts as well. And the comments were all like, this stuff is so good. It was so easy to make. And I'm like, I know, guys. This is what I've been talking about for the past 3 years. So yeah, that's kind of the idea. I skipped through this, but I talk about my awareness of violence, how I'm affected being around that violence. I focus on the relationship. So especially if I'm talking to friends or family especially, I tell them how important the time is that I spend with them. You know, I genuinely love spending time with my family. We're very close. But when I'm, sitting at a table with these animal products, I don't want to be bothering you guys talking about how much this bothers me. But inside, we probably all know this, how much it bothers us, right? So I tell them, like, I don't want to suffer in silence anymore, and I want your support that when we're spending time together, we can all be happy, I've coached a lot of people through these types of conversations, and they've had relatively good results. Like, not surprisingly good. I think when you approach this from a place of no ego, and you just share your actual feelings with people that love you, they're usually, especially parents, especially moms, your moms don't want you to suffer, right? So they're usually, I don't know, at least that's my mom. I know that, she wants the best for me. My dad too, obviously. They both do. And yeah, really important that it's inclusive, so that you're inviting people to join you in meals that are truly full of positive peace, and that you are not just excluding yourself without talking about the reasons why. Thank you. If I can make, do we have time for questions? Yeah, we have. Okay, quick announcement before question time is the primary work that I do is actually through an organization that I started called Amazing Vegan Outreach. It has nothing to do with Kingian nonviolence. It has all to do with providing like professional trainings for activists who do outreach and talk to people on the streets or friends or family. If you're interested, this is a QR code which you can very easily scan from your seats, and it will link you to the website, which has the links to all of these social media accounts. So feel free to check it out. But if I have to choose one topic that I'm more passionate about than this stuff, it's Kingian nonviolence. So yeah, any questions?
Hey, thanks for your talk. Sorry about asking a skeptical question about the Liberation Pledge, but now you are in a position to give good counter arguments. If we compare this to this pledge in China back then, maybe for these people there it was easier to join the pledge because it has only good impact on their daughters, on their sons. It was kind of easy, and they weren't in the position to be obliged to change all their lifestyle. But if we are, 1% vegans, and even if all the 1% vegans agreed on this pledge, no one who is not vegan, or maybe very few people would also join, because they cannot say, I refuse to eat on the table where animal products are when I'm eating animal products at home. So what would you say to this? How do you imagine what impact the Liberation Pledge may have in the future, and how and why?
That is a really good question, and I'm thinking of so many things that I could talk about, And I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible. So, first of all, we got 1% of the population to take the Liberation Pledge, based on some things that I've heard and read about from a woman named, I think it's Erica Chenoweth. There's just a small percentage of the population that has to actively support a social justice movement. So I think it's something like 1.5% of the population actively supports a social justice movement in the past. Something like 80 to 90% of those movements have succeeded. So we don't actually need a lot of people. So we don't have to have the entire society taking the Liberation Pledge to achieve the goal that we want. The other one is, the first, I'm sure, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm sure that the first families that started taking this pledge and going against the cultural norm were probably ostracized, were probably judged by other people. So I'm sure that it had a negative effect on them when they started. It's that question of for me, it's kind of doing the right thing, even though it's very uncomfortable. They're not comfortable conversations. I don't like having them. But I've found that, I'll wrap up with this question. I think one of the biggest struggles that we face in this movement right now is that we talk about veganism so much, and veganism to me is part of the solution of eradicating speciesism. And most of society, a lot of people know about veganism, and they don't understand speciesism. And veganism is part of the solution to that. So this pledge forces me to really highlight and talk about the issue of speciesism, and I'm never misperceived as being, as veganism being a diet anymore. No one will ever think, oh, he just wants me to eat salad like him. So, yeah. If you want to talk more about it later, sorry, I was trying to condense that answer to that. So, hope it.
Last question. You're a great speaker, by the way, and I really enjoyed this. So, I've listened to both your presentation and Tobias's, and they have I'm trying to find a way to reconcile the differences, and I think these things are still up in the air. We don't know whether to choose the right thing or the effective thing. Nobody really, there's no right answer. And I still haven't found a right answer. And I think what I can get out of it is that we should support each other. And there's certain things that we, if we don't agree, let's not call each other out in public, maybe do privately. We can settle all our differences and focus on moving forward instead of nitpicking over little details. And yeah, I think disruptions are important. I mean, they're very uncomfortable. I don't like doing them. I do them, but after I do them, I think I feel good about it. So I don't know. I mean, who knows? Who knows what the right answer is? It's not really a question. I don't know. It's just been bugging me for a while. It's how do I reconcile these two different viewpoints that both mean well? What do we choose and when?
I think, so just to top up on your non-question,
yeah.
but thank you for that. I would have to say that I agree with you that I think there are different scenarios that call for different actions. I also think that when it comes to disruptions, I think right now, it's just kind of starting and some people are getting used to them and they're super uncomfortable. I don't think that they're being done extremely well, not from, there's little things we could have done better in that one, but I think the really important thing to remember for disruptions is they should be part of a much bigger goal. That they're not the goal itself, and a lot of times disruptions today are just let's go disrupt something and that's it, which I think is okay for kind of training people and getting used to it, but really I think we should be looking at a much larger scale, bigger picture. How can we organize some mass disruptions that are part of, that disruption is part of a greater goal, and that disruption just helps gain us whatever that is, leverage, negotiation power, visibility. Open rescuing is a very disruptive type of action. There's a specific reason why it's open and not clandestine. So anyway, we can talk about it for a long time. But yeah, thank you for your comment. And I agree. I'm just as confused as you, by the way. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think we should definitely support each other and strive to learn, the different perspectives, which is one of the main reasons why I'm here at this conference. And I've learned a lot. So thank you.
Thank you again for amazing talk.
Thank you.